And this is Dan Wilga and his presentation, Jackpot, a look inside a virtual pinball machine. So go ahead, Dan, it's all yours.
Thanks a lot. So the presentation that I'm going to give today has to do with what you see behind you here, my virtual pinball machine. I figured it's probably a good way to have something which is not strictly about programming as a way of just sort of relaxing and doing something a little bit recreational at 3:15 on a Friday. So what I did is I actually prepared a video that I will start playing. And I'll warn you in advance that if for some reason the audio isn't coming out, please do let me know and I will try to correct it. So I'm going to share my screen now. Hi, I'm Dan, and this is my virtual pinball machine. It's a cabinet I built myself, and I'd like to show you around. But first, it is kind of boring. It is until we turn it on. No, wait. I'm going to show you the real pinball machine first. This is Funhouse. It was made by Williams Electronics in 1990. And this particular one is from my personal collection. It's a really fun machine to play, and I like it a lot. So let's take a look. Sorry about this, folks. I had to figure out how to use technology. We
could hear it at times, but I'm not sure if it was the level of the video, the level of the sound.
Maybe what's happening is that it was the microphone was picking up the speaker in the same computer, and that's what you were hearing, and it was noise canceling it out. All right, what if we do?
That's better.
That's better? All right, I'm gonna get rid of. So this is the back box of the pinball machine. It's really where the brain of the pinball machine is in modern pinball machines. And it opens up this way. All right, so here is the way it opens up. And inside here is a large number of components in a machine in this era anyway. Newer machines are a lot more simplified than this. Here's where a lot of the power is generated for the various components, all of the solenoids, the flippers, the pop bumpers, and so forth. It's all generated and controlled through here. Over here is the actual computer that controls the main functions of the machine. And up here is where the sound is generated from the speaker that comes out of the speakers. All right, so the pinball machine opens up key at the bottom here. Then we have what's called a lockdown bar. That comes out. That's a good idea. Close this back up. But it doesn't feel the glass sliding out. Glass just slides right out. Set that aside carefully. And now the playfield lifts up. One thing it's a good idea to do the balls so that they don't suddenly come pouring down on you. This particular machine uses 3 balls. Many machines use more than that. Older machines only use a single ball. So now that we've got this up here, you can see some of the things that make up a typical pinball machine. So this is what the underside of the pinball machine looks like. Most modern machines have some version of this. They'll have different configuration, of course, depending on what's there. One thing that they have in common to start with, this is where the balls collect, and they normally rest before they're put into play. There is, next to that, 2 flippers. These are the solenoids that control flippers. When you press the button on the cabinet, this makes the electronics kick in and pull this mechanically here, and the flipper moves the ball. Then we have some light bulb sockets. These really just aren't circular, have little light bulbs inside them. Over here, this particular machine is a clock theme, and so this is the clock display, all the light bulbs that involve that. And right here, this is an up kicker. So what happens is that the ball will go through one of these 2 holes here, travel down this clear plastic subway, they're sometimes called, and come over here where it's then kicked out back onto the playfield at the top. Up here is the upper flipper on the left side. And then the most important thing of all, this is Rudy's jaw. Rudy is the dummy that lives in this game, and the central feature. And this is what moves his mouth up and down. Here you see the emulated pinball machine in action. Talk a little bit about the differences. First of all, on the minus side, it's 3D, but obviously not quite the same. Secondly, sometimes the physics aren't quite realistic. This can vary depending on the emulator. And in some cases, the emulators actually make this intentional because they want to make the game a little more exciting. And finally, there can sometimes be a little bit of lag. So the difference between the time when you push the button and the flipper actually makes contact with the ball might not really seem quite right compared to what a seasoned pinball machine player experiences. So things may not seem quite exactly the same. On the plus side, you can play hundreds of different machines that would otherwise be difficult or impossible or too expensive to find. Secondly, it's much easier and less expensive to repair a virtual pinball machine. Also, special effects can be added to a classic machine that was originally bland. So some people will add in special things that make the machine their own. And finally, entirely new machines can be created for no cost, just the time it takes to do it. So overall, the pinball machine is the same size as a real pinball machine cabinet. The majority of the cabinet is made out of this, which is called medium density overlay, or MDO. Essentially, it's 3/4 inch plywood with a piece of paper permanently attached to both sides. And this is really the same kind of stuff that they used to make road signs. It's pretty cool stuff, and pretty durable too once you paint it up. There are also a couple of places where we also just use regular 1/8" masonite for the back of the cabinet and one place on the front. I used a table saw with both regular and potato blades, a router and drill press, and bar clamps to hold it together at various times. So it really required too many extended tools that you might not otherwise have if you have a home workshop. Overall, the pinball machine uses no legs as it would an arcade machine. Side rails, which are on the side, also a real pinball machine. Lockdown bar at the front. The box in the back. Same primary real machine. Glass is the same size as the real machine, and also a little bit of Lexan, which is plastic storage. Finally, the point door on the front. Cosmetics, functional. 70 quarters. Sell real work. So the virtual pinball machine has 3 displays in it. The first one is a 42-inch TV. I've been a different 40-inch TV. I should break that one. So I actually just got this one. Shape on Craigslist. And what's kind of unique about the setup that I chose is that if you look down closely, you'll see that there's very little actual space between the edge of the display and the edge of the cabinet. Most of the time when people build these cabinets, they leave the TV in its original case. In order to prevent that, though, I actually took it out of the case. The advantage of that is, of course, it looks better, but the disadvantage is that it's a lot more fragile, as my misadventures point out. Next, we have the display for the score up here. I am using a 15-inch monitor, a very old one that was given to me. Turns out that an old LCD display is really just fine for this purpose. The monitor itself actually extends above it below what you see there. This is really just a small segment of it, covered over with a bezel. And finally, up the top here, we have another TV. This one, I believe, is 27-inch, if I remember correctly. And this is used to display the artwork for the pinball machine. All of these are handled by the Windows operating system, and so it's really just treated as one big desktop. All right, so this is the audio system that's used. We've got 2 car stereo speakers, and they are driven by a regular old LabTech computer speaker amplifier, which lives up here inside the back box. And way down in the cabinet, we've got the subwoofer that comes with it as well. So we've got a little bit of bass in this cabinet too. All right, so now that we've seen the outside of the machine, we'll take a look inside. This is going to take a minute though, so let's fast forward. So this is what the virtual pinball cabinet looks like inside. What we have right now is just a regular old PC. This particular one is running not a terribly up-to-date CPU, not a lot of RAM, doesn't really need a lot. The important thing is that the graphics card needs to have as many ports as you do displays. So three display ports on this particular graphics card. I'll tell you the specs at the end. However, if you don't want 3 displays, or if you don't want it a little bit of lag, or if you don't want display 4K resolution, well, you can probably get away with less expensive hardware. And very often you'll have some kicking around, especially if you've got playing games over the years. Maybe your gaming machine from 3 or 4 years ago is going to be suitable. All right, so inside the cabinet, we have, at the heart of it, a Pinscape expansion board. This device is it's an open source project created by a very knowledgeable person who designed it to take the inputs from the cabinet switches, things like the flipper buttons and the buttons on the front, and translate them into signals, joystick presses that the software understands and knows to, well, let's say move the flippers or do any of the functions of the pinball machine. The other thing that this first board does is it controls the plunger. So if you take a look over here, this device, which I have covered up currently, this is a series of LEDs. I've just got them covered up so that they don't interfere with the picture. However, the plunger moves here, and as it does, it allows light to fire up into this board right here. This is a little circuit board that contains a single row camera, and that camera then senses the position of the plunger, one pixel line at a time. When it does that, the software then translates that into motion on the screen, and it displays the plunger at a different position. The other thing that this first board does, if you look over here, is we have an actual plumb bob. This is the same kind of tilt bob that's used inside a real pinball machine to sense when somebody is shaking the machine too much. So this will give you a warning, say to not shake the machine so much, or it will also tilt the machine if you do it too much, depending on your game settings. So the other thing that this first board does is it has an accelerometer built into it, which also is what we use to know when the machine is being shaken. What it will do is it will translate that software into the emulation, and it will actually shake the ball around a tiny bit as well. And you can even control how much of an effect that has. So it's good for getting the more realistic effect of playing a real pinball machine, since everybody knows that nudging the machine is part of play. The next board that we've got is also from Pinscape, and this one is what controls the higher power outputs. So in this case, I'm using it to control lights. So if you zoom over here to this light switch, see that it's blinking right now. That's going through that second Pinscape board, and it's being powered by this regular old PC power supply right here. The other thing that happens with this is we've got solenoids. So when I push this flipper button over here, it makes this solenoid right here contact, which produces a sound that's more realistic than the normal sound effects that are part of the emulation. And finally, I have a row here of 3 different solenoids. These are 12-volt solenoids, and these produce various little sound effects. So for instance, when the slingshot is hit, that's down by the flipper, on the left side, this one would fire. On the right side, this other one fires. And if it's something that's happening in the middle of the playfield, this would happen. There's these 3 here, but there's also 3 more in the middle and 3 more toward the back. And by having them positionally situated, you sort of get a more realistic idea of where the sound is coming from. So it's a little more like a real pinball machine. The fortunate thing is, the software knows about all this stuff. You just tell it how many solenoids you have and how they're laid out. And the way that the games are written, they automatically know that if one of these pop bumpers up here is being triggered by the ball, it should fire a solenoid that's about in this area of the playfield. It's a bit cool that way. Now, there are other things that you can have for your high power outputs. Some people do things like having a shaker motor that actually shakes the entire machine during certain games. There actually were certain games produced in the past that do this intentionally. One of them is called Earthshaker, which is about an earthquake. And there's a few others as well. Some people do that. Other people will have things that they put on the top of the back box called toppers. Some people display up here that has other graphics that are specific to the game, some special lighting effects or something like that. Other games that have a fan that will blow at certain times of the game. And all those things can be controlled with the external board from the Pinscape. And the final thing that I sort of trigger off of that Pinscape board, the second one, is the knocker. And the knocker is that sound that you hear if you ever win a free game in a pinball machine and a really loud knocking noise. That's produced by another solenoid that lives inside the back box up in the corner. And I actually put a real solenoid back there, just like in a real pinball machine. And so the sound is pretty much identical to what you need. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this display back to its normal place. And I'm going to put back in this little filler block. What this does makes the machine look a little more finished. Otherwise, it's impossible to find a display that's the exact size of the pinball table. So this is kind of the best compromise I could come up with. It really doesn't look too bad in my opinion. All right, so let's move the machine back and put the glass back on. All right, so now let's talk about the software that runs this machine. So the most obvious thing is, of course, an operating system. We're using Windows. Personally, I would have rather used other things, but the software doesn't exist for anything but Windows. So we're not stuck with that. Next up, we've got what's called the front end. Now, front end is really just a way of choosing which game you want to play. In this particular case, I'm using one called Pinball X. It's free. And you use the keyboard, the regular pinball flipper keys, select which game you want to play. And so the artwork all updates nicely when switch between them. You just press the start button when the game launches. Press the exit button. That's where it works. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the software that sort of runs things behind the scenes. First up is Visual PinMAME. MAME itself is the multiple arcade machine emulator. It's been around for a long time, and what it does is it emulates traditionally video games. And because it's good at emulating all kinds of different computer hardware and electronic hardware that's been developed over many, many years, somebody came up with the bright idea of setting it to the task of emulating actual pinball machine code. So what it does is it emulates all the switch input and everything else and routes what you do with those joystick inputs coming from the switches and things on your cabinet, routes those into the actual firmware that ran on the original pinball machine. Some pinball machines don't use this because the game code is actually written by somebody to be specific to that game, but Visual PinMAME lets you run all this old hardware on, emulate all this old hardware on a modern PC. And let's take a look at the display. That's really the other function that it does. Is it shows you the display on the screen. In this case, a dot matrix display, but it also does regular old LED displays that display on that middle monitor in my case. All right, so this is Visual Pinball. This is the software that I'm using to emulate the pinball machines and controls. It's kind of like the brains of everything in here. What it does is lets you edit the table and draw all the 3D primitives that make it up, all the ramps and the lights. It lets you control the textures that are displayed in the images and how all these parts interact with each other. And there's also a little bit of programming involved. If you want to, you can change options here. This of course is one that I just downloaded and made some very minor changes to get it to work the way that I wanted it to. But of course, if you want to, you can create an entire pinball machine from scratch if you want, and control all the sound effects and lighting and everything else. And it's really actually a lot of fun to look at. This software interacts with Visual PinMAME, as I said, but it also interacts with another piece of software called the Direct Output Framework, or DOF, DOF. What that does is that is what handles all the lighting effects. So every time the pinball machine
realizes that a particular light should flash, it has the ability to have something that's on your cabinet flash instead. The same can also be said for the solenoids. All those sound effects that I have from the 9 solenoids running through the middle of the playfield, plus the 2 flippers and the knocker, those are all routed through DOF. And the games are actually pre-designed to work with that, many of the newest ones. And there are literally hundreds of machines. Some of them are these ones like Funhouse, which emulate a real existing machine, but also hundreds of ones that people have just created from scratch and are also very often very fun to play. There's another emulator out there too, which is completely separate from Visual Pinball that I've tried. It's called Future Pinball. And that one has only tables that are made from scratch. The effects in that game are actually quite good. I've just had a little bit of difficulty running it on my particular cabinet. I find that it doesn't necessarily work quite as well, but it actually has a very well-designed tutorial on how to set it up. Some of this stuff can be rather difficult to set up, but Future Pinball, the guy who has been working on the software for it lately, has done a fantastic job with some video tutorials for it. Let's talk about the cost of pinball emulation. The cheapest way is absolutely free. Set up Visual Pinball or other here's about creating a full-size cabinet at all. Instead of buttons and other switches, you just use a keyboard and a single regular computer monitor. It's a great way to try out emulation to see if you like it or to see if your hardware is powerful enough for emulation. This just install the basics using the tutorial that can be found in the document that's available at the end of this video. Next up, some specialized input hardware. Somewhere between $50 to $300. So what you do in this case is you keep using a regular monitor, but you add a special controller. This takes the place of a joystick, like video games. I built one by taking apart an old keyboard, PC keyboard, wiring some arcade game switches to it. This was housed in a box that was the same width as an actual pinball machine. I also, along the way, included 2 joysticks and some extra arcade switches and a rotary controller so I could play emulated video games using MAME as well. There are also some mass-produced consoles that do the same thing. Finally, you can go the full-out cabinet route like I did. So I was estimating that that would cost you somewhere between $1,600 to $2,900 altogether. Depends a lot, however, on what you want to put into it, and also what you have available already. So if you have like an old TV you can put in, you can save quite a bit of money by not buying something new. You might also have a copy of Windows you can throw onto the box and save a lot of money that way. Computer, motherboard, power supply, case, all those things you might have lying around already. You do, it's a big savings. So there actually is a price list that you can use as kind of a guide for estimating what it would cost to do the various things you might want to do. And the price list is included in the link that's at the end of this video. So you'll see that here. You can go to this page. It's a PDF document you can look at. And it also includes a QR code that you can scan here to get to it. And if you take a look at that, I think you'll find it helpful, and that's all I've got. So thanks for looking at the video, and I hope you enjoy.
All right, since very likely nobody had a chance to get that URL down, I'll try to make sure that it gets added to the description of my session at the end, but I'm also just trying to find it in my paste buffer so that I can put it in the chat for anybody who wants it, because that would be the smart thing to do. If you hold on a moment, I will get that for you. All right, so here's actually what that other URL resolves to. Let me put that in the chat. And so I can even share this in just talk about it for a moment if anybody's interested. If I can find the right window. So this just basically summarizes some of the stuff that I just said. It lists all the different software. Starts off with some websites that have tons of information about doing this, perhaps even too much information about doing this, so that it can actually get a little bit confusing trying to pick through and find out the best bits. But then it goes through and lists all the different software that would be used. So if you wanted to just start out with a bare bones setup to see if it's something that you even find at all interesting, you can just go right to the Visual Pinball 9, or even to further down here, the tutorials, which give you a sort of all-in-one installer for Visual Pinball. And all the other software is listed here. And this describes the Pinscape boards, which is the two little hardware boards that handle the switch inputs and so forth. And Pinball X, the front end. And then here we've got the cost. The biggest question on everybody's mind, I'm sure. And so there you go. If there are any more questions, I'll be glad to take them.
That is amazing. How long did that take for you to put together?
I would say, of course, it was, it was over the course of a long time. I'm guessing probably the initial build of the cabinet took about, 2 weeks of evenings, and then adding in all the hardware and setting up all the software, probably another couple of months of evenings. And, and then there's all the little things that I've added over the course of time.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, especially if you've ever, played pinball machines and all. That's remarkable.
Yeah, and it's really a good way to be able to play some of the machines that either you can't get to anymore because they aren't around, or they're just too expensive to buy. I actually do have a small collection of real machines, and they're probably worth 4 or 5 times what I paid for them already. Costs of the real machines have just gone up and up.
Yep. No, you can't. Where you used to go play them, they don't exist anymore.
And that's very true.
Does anybody have any questions for Dan? We have a few minutes.
I have a question. Now that the fun of building it is done, do you still play with it on an ongoing basis?
I do, yeah. And what I did recently is I went and downloaded a whole bunch of new games to install on it. So I've got I think like 75 or something. I don't remember now what the number was. I can actually call that up right now and find out. Takes a moment to exit the game. So let's see. Oh, 42 tables at the moment. Not sure if my camera is actually going here. It's not. Here we go. Let's do that. And now you can see again. So yeah, I've got 42 different tables at the moment. I prefer mostly the ones that were made by Bally Williams, and they're pretty fun to play. It's I also play pinball competitively. There are leagues, kind of like bowling leagues, only without the bad clothing. And so in the pinball leagues, you're playing machines that are on location at some particular place, but very often they're machines you've never played before. So installing them on a box like this is a good way to know how to play the game before you get there.
Oh, Anyone else?
Okay.
Mm.
Well, thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you very much, Dan. This is very fascinating, very fascinating. Great job.
All right, enjoy the rest of the summit, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.